Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
You made it, my friends. You're halfway through the 50 most relevant for 2021. Hello, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel, and joining me, fellow panelist Kane. Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Very well, MJ. Dayne Zorko, an old classic of ours that year after year just is always in the mix, and yet it never seems to get any love.
Just never seems to get any love, but if your time you run right with him over the past couple of years especially, he would have been that perfect, unique midfielder. It's been a while since he's had this forward eligibility again. Early on in his career, he had it, but he's even shown as a midfielder only the past few seasons that when he gets on a run, he's right up there in that top tier of midfielders for us. Now, we get him as a mid-forward. 31 years old. His top score last year came against the Gold Coast Suns in AFL Fantasy. It was a 124, while it was a 163 against the Bulldogs in SuperCoach. Those scores, as great as they sound, remember, that AFL Fantasy is not an adjusted average score. That's what he delivered. You hear them and you go, cool, yeah, okay, the boy's got ceiling. That's nothing compared to some of his career best scores. In fact, it came against the Cats all the way back in 2017. What was it? A 181 in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam, and he almost joined the 200 club, a 196 last year. You think about his year, there might be moments where you reflect on it and go, oh, look, he was okay. But if this is just his okay year, then coaches should be excited heading into 2021. An average of 78.9 in AFL Fantasy is an adjusted average score of 98.6, while it was a 97.9 in SuperCoach, meaning in that format, he's going to be priced at just over 525K, just over 750K in AFL Fantasy, and just a touch under $730,000 in DreamTeam. And Kane, while the year didn't end quite the way both he and his Brisbane Lions had hoped in that preliminary final against the Cats, we saw some incredibly strong signs from him and the Lions that even at 31, probably 32 by the time the season gets underway, Zorko's scoring is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, MJ, he was, not in the midfield as much as previous years, and he still got the job done. Again, it was a funny start to the year for Zorko. He battled an Achilles injury in round 3, came back in round 4, got injured with his calf against the Crows, and then subsequently missed round 5. So in the first 5 rounds, he only played 3 games, and he went at an average of 53 DT unadjusted and 69 SuperCoach points. But when he came back against the Cats, from that point onwards, he went at 85 DT. So we can convert that already up to a 106, 107. And he went at 105 SuperCoach. That's 12 games at 105 SuperCoach. And we've got this guy priced at 98. So you start getting anywhere near 100 in the forward line, MJ, you're going to be in the mix. You're going to be in the mix for a top 6. And this is a guy that's got, premium scoring pedigree all the way back to his debut season. His debut season, he went at a ton in SuperCoach, 94 in DT. So from when Dayne Zorko jumped on the scene as a mature age recruit in 2012, outside of 1 year, which was his second when he dropped to the 70s in DT and low 80s in SuperCoach, the rest of them are premium numbers, like premium numbers that you can bank on year in, year out to be competing as a top 6 forward.
And when we look at the top 6 forwards of what he has done and what he's in the potential of being able to do, he's right in the mix. From those 15 games you mentioned he did last year, 3 tons and 4 additional scores of 80 plus. Pretty much 50% of the games that he played, he delivered a ton for us last year in an unadjusted average score. SuperCoach, 8 tons. And something that's important about talking about Dayne Zorko, ceiling in a bunch of these two 150 plus scores for Zorko and that incredibly strong run home. Let's contrast him in terms of what he is coming in for us right now as a forward eligible option. In contrast to the other forwards, he delivered a season ranked 7th for total points and 8th for averages against our current available forwards in 2021. While in DreamTeam and Fantasy, he's ranked 5th for total points by forwards, 3rd by averages, including some injury impacted games through there. So we've got this guy who clearly is at the top of the tree of our forwards. And like you mentioned, going back just through the past 5 years, let's not go back to 2012, but these are his past 5 seasons of averages in Dream Team and Fantasy: 104, 96, 114, 106, 90, while in SuperCoach, 100, 108, 110, 95, and a 106. Yes, in some of those games, he's playing as a pure midfielder, but there were big chunks of 2020 where he was doing that too. So to say, oh, the season for his ceiling is gone, or for the time for him playing through the midfield, I think if you look at the Brisbane midfield group and also the Brisbane forward group in isolation, it's really clear that Brisbane needs Zorko probably more midfield still, while they do want him forward. What's your take on how you see this split heading into a new year?
Well, MJ, let's just start off by saying he's still the captain of the club and a super important player at that. Clearly, Lachie Neale, is the crown jewel in the midfield unit. And they've got some really good worker bees alongside him. Jared Lyons is as underrated as it comes. McCluggage does heaps of legwork out on the wings with Mitch Robinson.
Yeah.
And then up forward, they've got a bit of a spine now that looks really rock solid in Hipwood and Danaher. We obviously hope that Joe's on the park most weeks.
Yeah.
You throw in the most dangerous forward in the league, in my eyes, in Charlie Cameron, and a nice piece alongside him in Lincoln McCarthy that can really get under the radar and kick a few goals.
Rayner's in there.
When needed. Rayner's in there as well. And then you throw in a guy who's a complete X factor in Nakai Cockatoo. So if he's on the field, Zorko's real ability is, it's a half forward role. I think when people think forward, they often think he's going to be stationed in a forward pocket. It's going to be really hard. Just because he's not the centre bounce doesn't mean that he can't be pushing straight from that half forward flank. It's the old school role we saw Lachie Whitfield play, in 2 years ago, when started on the half forward flank, pushed straight into the centre square, because that's where he's at his best. He's a ferocious tackler. He's one of the best pressure players in the competition. He's got great burst out of the stoppage. And looking at his kick to handball ratio, 3.6 kicks for every one handball. That's how he likes to use it. Now that he's got some real key targets to aim at with that delivery, that's where I see his most value. Because, again, while the Lions midfield is clearly strong, especially at the top line, it's not super, super deep in my eyes. Again, they brought in Cam Ellis-Yolman, and it didn't really work out. They pushed him straight forward after a while because it just wasn't the type of mix they were after. So if my mix is Zorko, Neale, McCluggage, Lyons, and again, they're going to give, obviously Berry's in there as well, building. They're going to give a Rayner, maybe 1 or 2 centre bounces a half. Like, they're going to do little things like that when those guys are off the ground. But really, that is the core of their team. I don't see Zorko's desire up forward. Again, if there's big injuries up forward, clearly there's going to have to be some restructuring. And Dayne can play that role. But I think when he plays forward, it's not the forward pocket forward role. It's the half forward, pushing up, straight up the ground, getting involved, because that's where he's at his best. He's not really a crumbing player, Zorko. He's a player that wants to be running towards goal. He wants to be attacking from, half forward and, in that 40-metre area. You'd rather have a Rayner down there, one out, who can take a mark. Obviously Cameron in space is incredibly dangerous. Cockatoo in space when fit, very hard to match up with. So I just think when people think forward, I think they're thinking Zorko is going to be trapped in the forward 50 and can't leave. And I just don't see it being like that, because for me, he's just way too valuable with his pressure and his ball use and his ability to break away from a stoppage that's a bit different than the other guys in there. So I think he's going to be fine in that role. And I think it's pretty similar to what he played last year, especially when fit. And we read out those numbers and they were, around the 105 mark across the formats. And if you got that, you're stoked. You really are.
That's genuinely maybe not in SuperCoach this year. If a fit Dangerfield, a midfield role, Dunkley, a Steele Sidebottom continues on, these Marshall, if he gets free ruck role, if a Ryder goes down, then it's going to be hard for him in that format to compete. But in Dream Team and Fantasy, you can see a world where that average of 100 there and thereabouts, he's going to be knocking the door down right on the top. Like, I think he could play, and he did play last year, a similar style of role, albeit with a little bit more zing and pressure to what Gary Ablett did for Geelong last year. Still spent plenty of time up the ground, but didn't have to spend a heap of time at centre bounce to impact the contest. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we do see a gradual decrease of centre bounce attendances of Zorko. Sure. Now, he has only been in the AFL system for a decade. So he'll be 31, 32 by the time games start. That's normally when older players start to wind down. He's got 4 preseasons less in his body than these other guys do. So you can build a case relatively easily with that. And the fact that I think he's missed 6 games since his debut through injury, that he's as fit and as strong and as healthy as you're going to get.
And thing, MJ, as well, is a lot of the time with those guys that decline, you start to see a gradual drop. And Zorko's had, you read up the numbers, some really good seasons. And he's had some bounce backs. 2018 was quiet by his standards at 95. And the next year he was back to 105.
Yeah.
And even last year we've got him at, basically 96 and 98. But there's also an injury affected game in there. So there's some built-in value. For me, he's a guy that in DT at worst, you're going to get a 90.
I agree.
Like, really, is that the worst thing if he falls away 5 points? And again, in SuperCoach, it's probably similar. It's probably low 90s at worst.
Yeah.
Again, do I think 114 will get challenged again? No, I don't. Do I think he can even go much over 105? Probably not. But if he hits 100 on the nose, I'm very content, especially if I start him and he gets away to one of these hot starts, which I know he can.
Yep.
And then people start thinking, oh, Zorko's having a good season. He might be a top 6 forward. And they bring him in. That's where I think people get disappointed, because that's what owners who've jumped on Zorko after a hot start have realized, is he is volatile. If you ride the roller coaster for the whole year, by year's end, you look at it and you go, that's a good average. But sometimes if you get on the Zorko train, especially after a big stretch of games, he can drop, 250s in a 3-week period. And and that's where the frustration builds. We know that 2018 season where again, I say just average 95, but by his standards, that is low. He started the season in, let's be honest, horrendous scoring fashion.
It wasn't.
Again, MJ, through 6 rounds, he was averaging 67 in DT. And people were freaking out. And in SuperCoach, he averaged 66. What did he do from the 16 games following? He averaged 108.
Yeah.
Like, that's what he is like. So, again, when you start him, obviously a lot of that risk is gone because everything's going to be smoothed out over the course of a whole season. And that's where my caveat would be. If Zorko gets off to an absolute red hot start, you cannot get sucked in to buying him at top dollar.
Yeah.
On the flip side, if he comes out and has 250s in a 3-week period and is averaging 80 after round 5 or 6,
keep calm.
Do not be afraid to jump on
and
enjoy the riches, because he's shown it year after year. It all seems to smooth out, and it all seems to be right on that fringe of a top 6 forward.
And no one's talking about him again. He's not a point of difference for the sake of being unique. Is Dayne Zorko, if you were to rank the top 10 guys in terms of how you think they're going to go for total points and averages in 2021 through your forward line, I can't see a world in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team where he's not in it. And in SuperCoach, you could argue it. But there takes a little bit of a compelling case and a little bit of faith being put into some players. So for me, he's right in that mix for that top 10 scoring forward available option for us. And that becomes the choice then of, do I hope I can get him at the hot run and I dodge those bad scores? Can I time the run right? And that all of a sudden I miss that 70 or that 80 average and I instead get that 105 average to the end of the year and I get him at that right price. That'll be the dilemma for coaches of looking over his career going, do I just ride it for the year or do I time it? That'll be the dilemma for people.
And MJ, the thing as well in the past that did hurt him with some of that volatility was that he was the tag target. That is no longer the case.
Not at all.
Whatsoever. It is clearly Lachie Neale, not only because he's the best player in the team, also very susceptible to a tag.
Yes.
And that's something that for Zorko, he was putting up with. And he could put up some absolute stinkers when he got tagged. So to have that out of it, maybe that takes that game that was a 40 or a 50 in the past and makes it a 70.
Yeah.
And, across the whole season, a 20-point improvement, that gets you a point a week. So, again, he feels like a guy to me that you'd be foolish not to consider because of his age.
Yeah, I
He's
think
still
so too.
playing way too well. We haven't seen that drop-off because that's where it gets risky. Is usually you see a gradual decline
Yeah.
And then you get hit with the 20-point drop, not to single someone out, but, it's a Nathan Jones type of thing where I'm ticking. Look how consistent he is. Look how consistent
Well, it's
he
Cade
is. Oh, he had a
Simpson
bit
of
of a
last
drop.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, you can have a drop, and then unfortunately, it falls away.
Yeah.
When I look at Zorko, captain, a team that is really in the premiership hunt, genuinely in the premiership hunt, have added pieces that support him playing in the role he plays best.
Yes.
They haven't added another centre bounce midfielder that, if they added Adam Treloar, you'd be going, okay,
this is
that's
trouble.
a bit tricky. They've added Danaher, they've added Cockatoo, they added Archie in previous years. They added Ellis Yeoman, who clearly after being trialled, is a depth player.
Yeah.
Again, Devin Robinson's a good kid, but we're talking about winning premierships here.
Right
like
now
that.
With this list, yeah.
Again, more than happy for him to take a season or two, develop. Like he's 19, 20 years old. Like I know when they get drafted high, and he had big raps as a junior fantasy player, but he's not breaking into that side as a consistent player that's going to affect a guy like Dayne Zorko, who's the captain. And MJ, as we always say, he loves to tackle. So when you've got that tackling and that ball winning ability, I think he's a lot more foolproof than people are realizing.
I agree.
I think you can make a case for some other forwards having some bigger question marks.
Yep.
Namely Josh Dunkley and Patrick Dangerfield.
Yeah.
And I think Zorko just goes about his business, and there's going to be a point in the season where people have to decide, do I jump on? Is this real? Do I wait?
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, is Zorko having that big drop off, or is he not? So for me, I feel like by season's end, he's going to get where we think he's going to get. He's going to be between 90 and 100.
Yep.
The flip side, the positive for him is he's got a great buy. That first buy round 12, there's not a massive amount of competition for him in that buy round. I think in the forward line, the key players that we think of in round 13, he's got a buy. He's probably competing with Josh Dunkley for mine, and obviously Dustin Martin. But really, there's not too many other guys that you think, what can I do here? Obviously Neil in the midfield, but I think it's a very easy buy to navigate.
Yeah, your back line doesn't feel decimated in that line. So you look at it, it's your Zach Williams. It is probably your
Ridley.
biggest name. Yeah, rolling through there. But beyond that.
Yeah, MJ, it's one of those things that if you've got to pick a line, we spoke about it yesterday with Petrarca, round 14 is massively problematic.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, sometimes you have to say, if round 14 is a big issue, I've got to look closer at these round 12 and 13 guys to balance that out. And if you think there's a few guys that you really like in round 12 and you can't go without, maybe when it comes to a 50-50, you say, hey, I can't decide here between Dangerfield and Zorko, but hey, I've already got a lot of round 12. I know round 14 is an issue.
Yeah.
I might just go to Zorko because I think I'm going to get a similar return, but I've got a better buy structure. So I think that's a case for him that's always going to turn his favor, because looking at that for me, round 13 is the easiest of the three to navigate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think if he's not in your starting squad, and I understand why you might choose not to do that, he's definitely someone that you're going to want to have at some point in your team by the end of 2021. So if it's not a starter, that's okay. Target, where are you bringing him in? Is it after that round by heading into round 14, or is he an upgrade target over those first 3 months? That'll be the thing. But where he goes in drafts really interests me, because we've talked about it a lot. We probably will keep doing it over the next 25 players to go, is that early in the draft, especially in the first round, it'll be locking away these alternate positions beyond the midfield. And so we'll see a lot of M1s going in probably the second round. And I don't know, if it's a 10-team league, I actually genuinely wouldn't be shocked if one midfielder didn't get picked in the first round. I wouldn't be shocked if someone said no midfielders got picked. It'd be rare, but I wouldn't be shocked if that's the case. But he's not quite in that perceived top group of forwards. Dangerfield, side bottom, certainly in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy, feel like that really clear safe too. Then you've got the likes of Dunkley, who a lot of people loving. Rowan Marshall has got his owners that love him. Dustin Martin, while again, probably more SuperCoach leaning now at this point of his career, still is very dependable and durable for us and can pop in AFL Fantasy. So he's probably not in most people's top tier of forwards, maybe not even in the second, depending on how they've structured their rankings. But he should be someone's F1. So his range of where he goes in rounds could be anywhere from a late second, if someone's really desperate for a forward one, right through to the late fourth. Like it legitimately could, maybe even the fifth round, if someone chooses to not believe he has a great year. So for one of the top tier forwards this year, he's got, I think, one of the most diverse outcomes of where he could get drafted. Where are you seeing he might go on draft day?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, MJ, is while I think Zorko can definitely challenge, a Dangerfield and a Sidey, I'm not spending that draft pick capital to pick him there. I think your Dangerfield, your Sidey, and personally, I truly believe Josh Dunkley is going to be back to his best. So for me, I could make a case for Dunkley being a top 5 pick, but we'll save that for another podcast. I think Zorko is your guy that, again, if you can get him late in the 4th, ideally for me, it's the 5th, because typically, if you want to compare a forward and a back to a midfielder, usually you have to add about 10 points of value. So if you think Zorko's a 95 guy, you want to be sort of drafting him when there's 105 midfielders sort of coming off the board, roughly. So again, if we take that up to 100, like you mentioned, if we view him as a 100 forward, then he's probably top 5 forwards. He's really up there with 110 midfielders in terms of the value you're getting.
Yeah.
And I think forwards falls away quite a bit once you get out of the top sort of 10. So for me, I'd love him on end of the 4th, start of the 5th.
Yeah.
Because I think there's going to be coaches that like Heaney. If Toby Green even gets a sniff of midfield opportunity in the preseason, he could slide. But it's the durability of Zorko in a draft that I really, really love. And that's where Dusty as well is always so great.
Yeah.
And especially when Dusty usually finishes well. And Zorko's a bit like that too. He can really get going late in the season when we know drafts are won. So I think if you're spending, a high 30, early 40s, if in that, again, that's back of the 4th, start of the 5th in a 10-team league, that's when you're probably going to get really good value, that you get what you pay for there with Zorko, and maybe you get lucky and he does challenge the top forwards. But really, your worst case scenario then is, again, a very high 80s, low 90s, and you're just building away beautifully. You've got a key F1, like you mentioned, MJ, and you can really do whatever you want the rest of your draft and feel pretty comfortable.
Yeah, I think so. Look, it's going to be really interesting to see where he goes on draft day. Our friends, the Draft Doctors, in the next coming week or so, will be releasing their mock draft simulator. We've already chatted to the Statesman. We've already chatted to Stevie Fears. If you do play drafts, that'll be one of those things you want to test and trial and see how. If you go, all right, I'm going to target Dayne Zorko in round 4. What does that mean I do in other parts? What does that mean it dictates in other things? That'll be the fascinating thing. And that great resource our friends at the Draft Doctors bring out every single year. Well, we're halfway through the 50 most relevant. Have there been a bunch of 25 players that if you've heard their names, you've gone, why the heck are they there? No, they're too high. No, they're too low. Or I didn't think about that option before, or that confirmed what I was already processing. That's exactly what this season is about, and what this series is about. Is about starting a conversation with you, helping you in your fantasy footy side, really, no matter the format you choose to play. So we're halfway through, and Kane, the good thing is some of the biggest, most challenging, most confronting, and surprising names are still to come in the top 25. It's going to be interesting to see how it lands.
I'm very excited, MJ. You haven't revealed what's to come. I've got a few players I think that are there, but you're always known for a surprise or two, so I'm not going to pencil any in just yet.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see. If you want to know who's in at number 24, you can join our Patreon supporter group. You can get a day ahead information from everybody else, as well as a bunch of other exclusive content. All the links for that can be found at the same place you can find the article on Dayne Zorko over at coachespanel.tv. If you're loving these podcast episodes, make sure you're subscribing to whatever platform you're choosing to listen to, and leave a nice 5-star rating and review so that others in the fantasy footy community can know what you already know about the Coaches Panel. Tomorrow we hit 24, and I can't wait to talk to you about this player.
Give it all, now give it true, give it up,